Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Manly Hall. This is The Secret Teachings of All Ages. We are up to 16, I believe, fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds. We are reading along and discussing as we go along, so it is not entirely reading, but this format is not for everyone. And before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time you get lost in the weed, there are various playlists linked at the top and down below with the original source material so that you can go back and figure out what I am actually talking about. I do try to be as clear as I can, but sometimes it doesn't translate well because I have already covered it and I am a bad one for not recovering information. With that being said, we are going to dive in and begin with fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds. Part 1. The creatures inhabiting the water, air, and earth were held in veneration by all races of antiquity. Realizing that visible bodies are only symbols of invisible forces, the ancients worshipped the divine power through the lower kingdom of nature. Because those less evolved were more simply constituted creatures, less evolved and more simply constituted, creatures responded most readily to the creative impulses of the gods. The sages of old studied living things to a point of realization that God is most perfectly understood through a knowledge of his supreme handiwork, animate and inanimate nature. Every existing creature manifests some aspect of the intelligence or power of the Eternal One, who can never be known save through a study and appreciation of his numbered but inconceivable parts. When a creature is chosen, therefore, to symbolize to the concrete human mind some concealed abstract principle, it is because its characteristics demonstrate this invisible principle in action. Fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds appear in the religious symbolism of nearly all nations because the forms and habits of these creatures, and the media in which they exist, closely relate them to the various generative and germinative powers of nature, which were considered as prima facie evidence of divine omnipresence. The early philosophers and scientists, realizing that all life has its origin in water, chose the fish as the symbol of the life germ. The fact that fishes are not most prolific makes the simile still more apt. While the early priests may not have possessed the instruments necessary to analyze the spermatozoon, they concluded by deduction that it resembled a fish. Fishes were sacred to the Greeks and Romans, being connected with the worship of Aphrodite, Venus. An interesting survival of pagan ritualism is found in the custom of eating fish on Friday. That's not true. Freya, in whose honor the day was named, was the Scandinavian Venus, and this day was sacred among many nations to the goddess of beauty and fecundity. This analogy further links the fish with the procreative mystery. Friday is also sacred to the followers of the Prophet Muhammad. Alright, so let's stop right here real quick. I am from Louisiana, if you were unaware, and this is a deeply, deeply Catholic state. So much so that our children get out of school for Mardi Gras, which is the holiday that they are celebrating by not eating fish, and it is simply an excuse for them to believe that they are doing something appropriate. That is all that is. They somehow came to the conclusion that not eating meat represents the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross. But then they made a loophole so that they could eat the meat of a fish instead of the meat of a land-bearing animal, and that was perfectly fine. It was a justification for breaking their own beliefs. That is why they eat fish on Fridays, and it is only during a few weeks of the year. It is not year-long. It is a practice that most of them do not even understand the reasoning for. They have no idea what actual Mardi Gras is standing for, much less Ash Wednesday. They have no real concept of Lent, other than that they eat fish on Fridays instead of meat, and then they go and get a little smear on their forehead. That is most people's understanding of Lent. You don't have to like that. I see that every day by people who profess to be worshiping Catholics that do not even understand the book from which they take their doctrine from. It is a wild, wild thing. we're going to touch on another thing right here while we are already paused. I do not believe in macroevolution. I believe in microevolution, evolution within the species. Absolutely a thing. That is why we have cars, houses, and electricity. But I do not believe in the missing link. I do not believe that we evolved from apes, much less from fish. There is no reason why a fish, upon coming out and somehow adapting to being able to breathe air, and we'll go ahead and throw that massive leap of faith in there, would evolve to develop hair to protect itself from the elements that it just removed itself from protection from. So it develops hair as it grows limbs so that it can somehow miraculously walk around on the earth. And its entire body becomes covered in hair so that it's protected from the temperature. And then all of a sudden we decided that was evolutionarily unnecessary. Now, I grow copious amounts of hair. I have hair that grows on my head, on my face, on my body, in various places. I call myself lightly wooded because it is not this thick everywhere. But there is zero reason why it should not be this thick everywhere, or at least this thick everywhere. It should be a complete covering so that you are protected from the elements. And if you were evolved from a monkey, that would be true. There are several things that logically are completely inconsistent with macroevolution. Microevolution is a thing, macroevolution is not. We did not come from monkeys. We didn't come from fish. We didn't come from protozoa. I believe that we were created. Who created us and with what reasoning is up for grabs. There is a whole bunch of stories about that. But there's no method in antiquity, not a single group of people ever recorded us making the transition. Recorded even the legend that the transition happened. Next, I have a whole thing about spiritual evolution that we're probably going to cover here, but we're going to go ahead and read some more before we get to it. The word noon means both fish and growth, and as Inman says, the Jews were led to victory by the son of the fish. Was David a fish? That's interesting. Whose other names were Yeshua and Jesus, the Savior. Actually, it is Yeshua and Yeshua. That's the actual pronunciation. You want to go back and read it? We did that. We did the word study on that. Joshua is the exact same as Jesus in the original language. You can go back and see that. It is in the Unconventional Bible Study. Nun is still the name of a female devotee, so that's nun, of the Christian faith, of the Catholic faith. Among early Christians, 3 fishes were used to symbolize the Trinity, and the fish is also one of the 8 sacred system symbols of the great Buddha. It is also significant that the dolphin should be sacred to both Apollo, the solar savior, and Neptune. It was believed that this fish carried shipwrecked sailors to heaven on its back. The dolphin was accepted by the early Christians as an emblem of Christ, because the pagans had viewed this beautiful creature as a friend and benefactor of man. The heir to the throne of France, the Dauphin, may have secured his title from this ancient pagan symbol of the divine preservative power. I would have to go back for the etymology of that to understand that, but the first advocates of Christianity likened converts to fishes, who at the time of the baptism returned again into the sea of Christ. Primitive peoples believed the sea and land were inhabited by strange creatures, and early books on zoology contain curious illustrations of composite beasts, reptiles, and fishes, which did not exist at the time the medieval authors compiled the voluminous books. In the ancient initiatory rituals of the Persian, Greek, and Egyptian mysteries, the priests disguised themselves as composite creatures, thereby symbolizing different aspects of human consciousness. They used birds and reptiles as emblems of their various deities, often creating forms of grotesque appearance, and assigning to them imaginary traits, habits, and places of domicile, all of which were symbolic of certain spiritual and transcendental truths, thus concealed from the profane. The phoenix made its nest of incense and flames. The unicorn had the body of a horse, the feet of an elephant, and the tail of a wild boar. The upper half of the centaur's body was human, and the lower half equine. The pelican of the Hermetists fed its young from its own breast, and to this bird were assigned other mysterious attributes which could have been true only allegorically. That is true. People have wild, fantastical imaginations about various beasts. Though regarded by many writers of the Middle Ages as actual living creatures, none of these, the pelican excepted, ever existed outside of the symbolism of the mysteries. That is a supposition. Possibly, we don't have proof of the negative, right? You can't have proof that they didn't exist. We just don't have proof that they did. So you can assume that they didn't. You can even believe that they didn't, but you cannot say for sure that there was never a creature that looked like any of these things. It is a possibility, and just because we have not discovered a fossil record thereof does not discount that. I'm not even saying it's likely. I'm just saying it is possible. And to the entirety of the possibility is just as silly as believing that we came from fishes. Possibly they originated in rumors of animals then little known. That is possible. In the temple, however, they became a reality, for there they had signified the manifold characteristics of man's nature. The manticora had certain points in common with the hyena. The unicorn may have been the single-horned rhinoceros. To the student of the secret wisdom, these composite animals and birds simply represent various forces working in the invisible worlds. That is true. It can be a misinterpretation of other animals. This is a point which nearly all writers on the subject of medieval monsters seem to have overlooked. See Valisis Androvandi's Monstranum Historia, 1642. I would like to have that. And Physica Curiosa by P. Gaspare Sciotto, 1697. There are also legends to the effect that long before the appearance of human beings, there existed a race or species of composite creatures which was destroyed by the gods. The temples of antiquity preserved their own historical records and possessed information concerning the prehistoric world that has never been revealed to the uninitiated. That is a supposition. According to these records, the human race evolved from a species of creature that partook somewhat of the nature of an amphibian. For at that time, primitive man had the gills of a fish and was partially covered with scales. I would love to see the source for this. If you have it, let me know. To a limited degree, the human embryo demonstrates the possibility of such a condition, no doubt. As a result of the theory of man's origin in water, the fish was looked upon as the progenitor of the human family. This gave rise to the ichthyology of the Chaldeans. Ichthyology of the Chaldeans, Phoenicians, and Brahmins. The American Indians believe that the waters of the lakes, rivers, and oceans are inhabited by a mysterious people, the Water Indians. The fish has been used as an emblem of damnation, but among the Chinese it typified contentment and good fortune, and fishes appear on many of their coins. When Typhon, or Set, the Egyptian evil genius, had divided the body of the god Osiris into 14 parts, he cast one part into the river Nile, where, according to Plutarch, it was devoured by 3 fishes, the Lepidotus, probably the Lepidosiren, the Pharegus, and the Onyxorhynchus, a form of pike. For this reason, the Egyptians would not eat the flesh of these fishes, believing that to do so would be to devour the body of their god. When used as a symbol of evil, the fish represented the earth, man's lower nature, and the tomb, the sepulchre of the mysteries. Thus was Jonah 3 days in the belly of the great fish, as Christ was 3 days in the tomb. Several early church fathers believed that the whale, which swallowed Jonah, was the symbol of God the Father, who, when the hapless prophet was thrown overboard, accepted Jonah into his own nature until a place of safety was reached. The story of Jonah is really a legend of initiation into the mysteries, and the great fish represents the darkness of ignorance, which engulfs man when he is thrown over the side of the ship, is born, into the sea, life. The custom of building ships in the form of fishes or birds, common in ancient times, could give rise to the story, and mayhap Jonah was merely picked up by another vessel and carried into port, the pattern of the ship causing it to be called a great fish, Veritas simplex orito est. More probably, the whale of Jonah is based upon the pagan mythological creature, hippocampus, part horse and part dolphin, for the early Christian statues and carvings show the composite creature and not a true whale. Okay, because it was not a whale, right? It was a great fish, according to the etymology. We did this, and so, Jonah was an allegory, more than likely than ever a real thing, right? And so, in part, this is correct. Now, the direct correlation between the whale or fish and God is a stretch. Stretching it out to a ship is even more of a stretch because that completely defeats the whole purpose of the thing. But it's an allegory, right? It is not a true historical account, and so therefore it has to be taken with a grain of salt regardless. The first incarnation, or Matsya avatar, of Vishnu from Picard's religious ceremonials. And this is an interesting one, right? There is a fish eating a woman. There is a multi-headed god over here, and there are 4 women in front of the fish in supplication, and it appears that there is a dead creature of the land here, probably some kind of a locust type representation. I am not fully versed in Vishnu and stuff. We will eventually get there, but we are not there yet. So, the fish, the fish has often been associated with the world's saviors. Vishnu, the Hindu redeemer, who takes upon himself 10 forms for the redemption of the universe, was expelled from the mouth of a fish in his first incarnation. Isis, while nursing the infant Horus, is often shown with a fish on her headdress. Oannes, the Chaldean survivor, borrowed from the Brahmins, is depicted with the head and body of a fish, from which this human form protrudes at various points. Jesus was often symbolized by a fish. He told his disciples that they should become fishers of men. The sign of the fish was also the first monogram of the Christians. The mysterious Greek name of Yeshua means a fish. That fish was accepted as a symbol of the Christ by a number of early canonized church fathers. St. Augustine likened the Christ to a fish that had been broiled, and it was also pointed out that the flesh of the fish was the food of righteousness and holy men. It is reasonable to suppose that the mysterious sea serpents, which, according to the Mayan and Toltec legends, brought the gods to Mexico, were Vikings or Chaldean ships, built in the shape of composite sea monsters or dragons. H.P. Blavatsky advances the theory that the word Cetus, the great whale, is derived from Keto, a name for the fish god Dagon, and that Jonah was actually confined in a cell, hollowed out in the body of a gigantic statue of Dagon after he had been captured by Phoenician sailors and carried to one of their cities. There is no doubt a great mystery in the gigantic form of Cetus, which is still preserved as a constellation. According to many scattered fragments extant, man's lower nature was symbolized by a tremendous, awkward creature resembling a great sea serpent or dragon called Leviathan. All symbols having serpentine form or motion signify the solar energy in one of its many forms. This great creature of the sea, therefore, represents the solar life force imprisoned in water, and also the divine energy coursing through the body of man, where, until transmuted, it manifests itself as a writhing, twisting monster, man's greeds, passions, and lusts. Among the symbols of Christ as the Savior of men are a number relating to the mystery of his divine nature, concealed within the personality of the lowly Jesus. The Gnostics divided the nature of the Christian Redeemer into 2 parts. The one, Jesus, a mortal man. The other, Christos, a personification of Nous, the principle of cosmic mind. Nous, the Greater, was for the period of 3 years, from baptism to crucifixion, using the fleshly garment of the mortal man, Jesus. In order to illustrate this point, and still conceal it from the ignorant, many strange and often repulsive creatures were used whose rough exteriors concealed magnificent organisms. Kennelly, in his notes on the Book of Enoch, observes, why the caterpillar was a symbol of the Messiah is evident, because under a lowly, creeping, and wholly terrestrial aspect, he conceals the beautiful butterfly form, with its radiant wings emulating in its varied colors the rainbow, the serpent, the salmon, the scarab, the peacock, and the dying dolphin. Insects. In 1609, Henry Kunrath's Amphitheatrum Sapientiae Aeternae was published. Eliphas Levi declared that within its pages are concealed all the great secrets of magical philosophy. A remarkable plate in this work shows the Hermetic sciences being attacked by the bigoted and ignorant pedagogues of the 17th century. In order to express his complete contempt for his slanderers, Kunrath made out of each a composite beast, adding donkey ears to one and a false tail to another. He reserved the upper part of the picture for certain petty backbiters, whom he gave appropriate forms. The air was filled with strange creatures, great dragonflies, winged frogs, birds with human heads, and other weird forms which defy description, heaping venom, gossip, spite, slander, and other forms of persecution upon the secret arcanum of the wise. The drawing indicated that their attacks were ineffectual. Poisonous insects were often used to symbolize the deadly power of the human tongue. Insects of all kinds were also considered emblematic of the nature spirits and demons, for both were believed to inhabit the atmosphere. Medieval drawings showing magicians in the act of invoking spirits often portray the mysterious powers of the other world, which the conjurer has exorcised, as appearing to him in composite part insect forms. The early philosophers apparently held the opinion that the disease which swept through the communities in the form of plagues were actually living creatures. But instead of considering a number of tiny germs, they viewed the entire plague as one individuality and gave it a hideous shape to symbolize its destructiveness. The fact that plagues came in the air caused an insect or a bird to be used as their symbol. Beautiful symmetrical forms were assigned to all natural benevolent conditions or powers, but to unnatural or malevolent powers were assigned contorted and abnormal figures. The evil one was either hideously deformed or else of the nature of certain despised animals. A popular superstition during the Middle Ages held that the devil had the feet of a rooster, while the Egyptians assigned to Typhon, devil, the body of a hog. The habits of insects were carefully studied. Therefore, the ant was looked upon as emblematic of industry and foresight, as it stored up supplies for the winter and also had the strength to move objects many times its own weight. The locusts, which swept down in clouds, and in some parts of Africa and Asia obscured the sun and destroyed every green thing, were considered fit emblems of passion, disease, hate, and strife. For these emotions destroy all that is good in the soul of a man and leave a barren desert behind them. In the folklore of various nations, certain insects are given special significance, but the ones which have received worldwide veneration and consideration ate the scarab, the king of the insect kingdom, the scorpion, the great betrayer, the butterfly, the emblem of metamorphosis, and the bee, the symbol of industry. The Egyptian scarab is one of the most remarkable symbolic figures ever conceived by the mind of man. It was evolved by the irradiation of the priestcraft from a simple insect, which, because of its peculiar habits and appearance, properly symbolized the strength of the body, the resurrection of the soul, and the eternal and incomprehensible Creator in his aspect as Lord of the Sun. E. A. Wallace Budge says, in effect, of the worship of the scarab by the Egyptians. Yet another view, held in primitive times, was that the sky was a vast meadow, over which a huge beetle crawled, pushing the disk of the sun before him. This beetle was the sky god, and arguing from the example of the beetle, Scarabus saucer, which was observed to roll along with its hind legs a ball, which was believed to contain its eggs. The early Egyptians thought that the ball of the sky god contained his egg, and that the sun was his offspring. Thanks, however, to the investigations of the eminent entomologist, Monsieur J. H. Fabre, we know that the ball which the Scarabus saucer rolls along contains not its eggs, but dung that is to serve as food for its egg, which it lays in a carefully prepared place. Initiates of the Egyptian mysteries were sometimes called scarabs, again, lions and panthers. Scarab was the emissary of the sun, symbolizing light, truth, and regeneration. Stone scarabs, called heart scarabs, about 3 inches long, were placed in the heart cavity of the dead, when that organ was removed to be embalmed separately as a part of the process of mummifying. Some maintain that the stone beetles were merely wrapped in the winding cloths at the time of preparing the body for their eternal preservation. The following passage concerning this appears in the great Egyptian book of initiation, the Book of the Dead. And behold, thou shalt make a scarab of green stone, which shall be placed in the breast of man, and it shall perform for him the opening of the mouth. The funeral rites of many nations bear a striking resemblance to the initiatory ceremonies of the mysteries. Ra, the god of the sun, had 3 important aspects. As the creator of the universe, he was symbolized as the head of a scarab and was called Khepera, which signified the resurrection of the soul and a new life at the end of the mortal span. The mummy cases of the Egyptian dead were nearly always ornamented with scarabs. Usually one of these beetles, with outspread wings, was painted on the mummy case directly over the breast of the dead. The finding of such great numbers of small stone scarabs indicates that they were a favorite article of adornment among the Egyptians. Because of its relationship to the sun, the scarab symbolized the divine part of man's nature. The fact that its beautiful wings were concealed under its glossy shell typified the winged soul of a man, hidden within its earthly sheath. The Egyptian soldiers were given the scarab as their special symbol, because the ancients believed that these creatures were all of the male sex and consequently appropriate emblems of virility, strength, and courage. Plutarch noted that the fact that the scarab rolled its peculiar ball of dung backwards, while the insect itself faced in the opposite direction. This made it an especially fitting symbol for the sun because the orb, according to the Egyptian astronomy, was rolling from west to east, although apparently moving in the opposite direction. An Egyptian allegory states that the sunrise is caused by the scarab unfolding its wings, which stretch out as glorious colors on each side of its body. The solar globe, and that when it folds its wings under its dark shell at sunset, night follows. Khepera, the scarab head aspect of Ra, is often symbolized riding through the sea of the sky in a wonderful ship called the Boat of the Sun. We have a picture of the manticore, which is a lion with a human head. Right, that is the main gist of the legend, right? From Red Grove's Bygone Beliefs. The most remarkable of allegorical creatures was the manticore, which Theseus describes as having a flame-colored body, lion-like in shape, 3 rows of teeth, a human head and ears, blue eyes, a tail ending in a series of spikes and stings, thorny and scorpion-like, and a voice which sounded like the blare of trumpets. This synthetic quadruped ambled into medieval works on natural history, but, though seriously considered, has never been seen, because it inhabited inaccessible regions and consequently was difficult to locate. The Royal Egyptian Scarab. From Hall's Catalogue of Egyptian Scarabs, etc., in the British Museum. The flat underside of a scarab usually bears an inscription relating to the dynasty during which it was cut. These scarabs were sometimes used as seals. Some were cut from ordinary or precious stones. Others were made of clay baked and glazed. Occasionally, the stone scarabs were also glazed. The majority of the small scarabs are pierced, as though originally used as beads. Some are so hard that they will cut glass. In the picture above, A shows top and side views of the scarab, B, and B, the undersurface with the name of Menkara within the central cartouche. The scorpion is the symbol of both wisdom and self-destruction. It was called by the Egyptians the creature accursed. The time of year when the sun entered the sign of Scorpio marked the beginning of the rulership of Typhon. When the 12 signs of the zodiac were used to represent the 12 apostles, although the reverse is true, the scorpion was assigned to Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. A scorpion stings with its tail, and for this reason it has been called a backbiter, a false and deceitful thing. Calmet, in his Dictionary of the Bible, declares the scorpion to be a fit emblem of the wicked and the symbol of persecution. The dry winds of Egypt are said to be produced by Typhon, who imparts to the sand the blistering heat of the infernal world and the sting of the scorpion. This insect was also the symbol of the spinal fire, which, according to the Egyptian mysteries, destroyed man when it was permitted to gather at the base of his spine, the tail of the scorpion. The red star Antares, in the back of the celestial scorpion, was considered the worst light in the heavens. Kalb al-Akrab, or the heart of the scorpion, was called by the ancients the lieutenant or deputy of Mars. See footnote of Ptolemy's Tetrabiblios. Antares was believed to impair the eyesight, often causing blindness if it rose over the horizon when a child was born. This may refer again to the sandstorm, which was capable of blinding unwary travelers. The scorpion was also the symbol of wisdom, for the fire which it controlled was capable of illuminating as well as consuming. Initiation into the greater mysteries among the pagans was said to take place only in the sign of the scorpion. In the Papyrus of Ani, the Book of the Dead, the deceased likens his soul to a scorpion, saying, "I am a swallow. I am that scorpion, the daughter of Ra." Elizabeth Goldsmith, in her treatise on sex symbolism, states that the scorpions were a symbol of Selk, the Egyptian goddess of writing, and also were revered by the Babylonians and Assyrians as guardians of the gateway of the sun. 7 scorpions were said to have accompanied Isis when she searched for the remains of Osiris scattered by Set, Typhon. In his Chaldean account of the Genesis, George Smith, copying from the cuneiform cylinders, in describing the wanderings of the hero Isdubar, Nimrod, throws some light on the scorpion god who guards the sun. The tablet which he translated is not perfect, but the meaning is fairly clear. Who each day guard the rising sun. Their crown was at the lattice of heaven. Under hell their feet were placed, the spinal column. The scorpion man guarded the gate, burning with terribleness. Their appearance was like death. The might of his fear shook the forest. At the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun they guarded the sun. Isdubar saw them, and fear and terror came into his face. Among the early Latins, there was a machine of war called the scorpion. It was used for firing arrows and probably obtained its name from a long beam, resembling a scorpion's tail, which flew up to hurl the arrows. The missiles discharged by this machine were also called scorpions. The butterfly, under the name of Psyche, a beautiful maiden with wings of opalescent light, symbolizes the human soul because of the stages it passes through in order to unfold its power of flight. The 3 divisions through which the butterfly passes in its unfoldment resemble closely the 3 degrees of the mystery school, which degrees are regarded as consummating the unfoldment of man by giving him emblematic wings by which he may soar to the skies. Unregenerate man, ignorant and helpless, is symbolized by the stage between ovum and larva. The disciple, seeking truth and dwelling in meditation maybe, by the second stage, from larva to pupa, at which time the insect enters its chrysalis, the tomb of the mysteries. The third stage, from pupa to imago, wherein the perfect butterfly comes forth, typifies the unfolded, enlightened soul of the initiate rising from the tomb of his baser nature. Night moths typify the secret wisdom because they are hard to discover and are concealed by the darkness, ignorance. Some are emblems of death, as Echerontia athropos, the death's head moth, which has a marking on his body somewhat like a human skull. The death watch beetle, which was believed to give warning of approaching death by a peculiar ticking sound, is another instance of insects involved in human affairs. Opinions differ concerning the spider. Its shape makes it an appropriate emblem of the nerve plexus and ganglia of the human body. Some Europeans considered it extremely bad luck to kill a spider, possibly because it is looked upon as an emissary of the evil one, whom no person desires to offend. Bullshit. There is a mystery concerning all poisonous creatures, especially insects. Paracelsus taught that the spider was the medium for a powerful but evil force, which the black magicians used in their nefarious undertakings. Certain plants, minerals, and animals have been sacred among all the nations of the earth because of their peculiar sensitiveness to the astral fire, a mysterious agency in nature which the scientific world has contacted through its manifestations as electricity and magnetism. Lodestone and radium in the mineral world and various parasitic growths in the plant's kingdom are strangely susceptible to this cosmic electric fire, or universal life force. The magicians of the Middle Ages surrounded themselves with such creatures as bats, spiders, cats, snakes, and monkeys, because they were able to appropriate the life forces of these species and use them to the attainment of their own ends. Some ancient schools of wisdom taught that all poisonous insects and reptiles are germinated out of the evil nature of man, and that when intelligent human beings no longer breed hate in their own souls, there will be no more ferocious animals, loathsome diseases, or poisonous plants and insects. Among the American Indians is the legend of a Spider-Man, whose web connected the heaven worlds with the earth. The secret schools of India symbolize certain of the gods who labored with the universe during its making as connecting the realms of light with those of darkness by means of webs. Therefore, the builders of the cosmic system, who held the embryonic universe together with threads of invisible force, were sometimes referred to as the spider gods, and their ruler was designated the Great Spider. The beehive is found in masonry as a reminder that in diligence and labor for a common good, true happiness and prosperity are found. The bee is a symbol for wisdom, for as this tiny insect collects pollen from the flowers, so men may extract wisdom from the experiences of daily life. The bee is sacred to the goddess Venus, and according to the mystics it is one of several forms of life which came to the earth from the planet Venus millions of years ago. Wheat and bananas are said to be of a similar origin. This is the reason why the origin of these three forms of life cannot be traced. The fact that bees are ruled by queens is one reason why this insect is considered a sacred, feminine symbol. And I'm going to stop right here because it's talking about something, and I don't know that it will ever hit on it again, so we're going to talk about this real quick. The banana is an unusual item. You cannot grow a banana from a seed, which means that every single banana tree has to have been cut and planted intentionally. It cannot have been a random chance that brought a branch 1,000 miles away and planted it in the ground and it grew. And yet we have bananas growing all across the Pacific. Right? There are so many islands that have banana trees, and it was unknown to the Europeans, right? But it is possible that the peoples of the islands went and made all of these plantings, but it had to have been an intentional choice. It was not random chance that sprouted banana trees. And it's one of those things, much like the hair issue, that throws a little bit of wonkiness into the evolutionary system, because the way that it reproduces and the fact that it is spread over such a vast area absolutely implies that it was an intentional creation and that it was intentionally distributed. Bananas also are a superfood, and you can extract every bit of what you need from a banana. It contains carbohydrates, it contains proteins, it contains the complex chains that you need to function. It has electrolytes built in. Now, in order to get that, you can't just eat the fruit, right? If you peel a banana, you get the fruit, and it's got them. There's like little veins that are a little bit rougher that run along the inside on the banana, right? You can peel them off, but they're pretty edible. You can peel something similar to that from the peel of the banana. And that is where the protein is actually stored so that it can be a complete food. If you only eat the fruit and discard the skin completely, you don't get that extra little bit. But if you take and you peel out the parts that are edible from the peel, which the whole peel is, but the outside is a little bit bitter, but the interior is a little bit woodier, it's a lot less sweet, but it's not quite bitter. And you can peel those pieces off and eat them. And a banana can sustain you almost indefinitely by itself. It is one of the only foods that it is possible to do that for, and it is impossible for it to have naturally propagated. It is a complete mystery, and it is a complete miracle that that plant even exists and is distributed in the way that it is. It is absolutely unexplainable, right? You can speculate, but there is the possibility that the island peoples did it, but the records, such as we have, seem to indicate that those plants were there when the island peoples moved there, which means, in my estimation, that there probably was a different civilization with which we are not familiar, which existed prior to the current histories that we have. My estimation that it is prior to, at a minimum, prior to the Noah's flood 6,000 years ago, but it is entirely possible that it has been here since before the Eden event 12,000 years ago. And I just wanted to point that out because chances are we will not get another chance to talk about bananas, and that is a wild rabbit hole to go down, y'all. In India, the god Prana, the personification of universal life force, is sometimes shown surrounded by a circle of bees. Because of its importance in pollinizing flowers, the bee is an accepted symbol of the generative power. At one time, the bee was the emblem of the French kings. The rulers of France wore robes embroidered with bees, and the canopies of their thrones were decorated with gigantic figures of these insects. The fly symbolizes the tormentor because of the annoyance it causes to animals. The Chaldean god Baal was often called Baal Zebub, or the god of the dwelling place. The word Zebub or Zabab means a fly, and Baal Zebul became Baal Zebub, or Beelzebub, a word which was loosely translated to mean Jupiter's fly. The fly was looked upon as a form of the divine power because of its ability to destroy decaying substances and thus promote health. The fly may have obtained its name Zebub from its particular buzzing or humming. Inman believes that Baal-zebub, which the Jews ridiculed as my lord of flies, really means my lord who hums or murmurs. Inman recalls the singing of Memnon on the Egyptian desert, a tremendous figure with an Aeolian harp on the top of its head. When the wind blows strongly, this great statue sighs or hums. The Jews changed Beelzebub into Beelzebub and made him their prince of devils by interpreting Damon as demon. Nautius, in defending Virgil from accusations of sorcery, attempted a wholesale denial of the miracles supposedly performed by Virgil and produced enough evidence to convict the poet on all counts. Among other strange fears, Virgil fashioned a fly out of brass, and after certain mysterious ceremonies, placed it over one of the gates of Naples. As a result, no fly entered the city for more than 8 years. Reptiles. The serpent was chosen as the head of the reptilian family. The serpent worship in some form has permeated nearly all parts of the earth. The serpent mounds of the American Indian, the carved stone snakes of Central and South America, the hooded cobras of India, Python, the great snake of the Greeks, the sacred serpents of the Druids, the Midgard snake of Scandinavia, the Nagas of Burma, Siam, and Cambodia, the brazen serpent of the Jews, the mystic serpent of Orpheus, the snakes at the oracle of Delphi twining themselves around the tripod upon which the Pythian priestess sat, the tripod itself being in the form of twisted serpents, the sacred serpents preserved in the Egyptian temples, the uraeus coiled upon the foreheads of the pharaohs and priests. All these bear witness to the universal veneration in which the snake was held. In the ancient mysteries, the serpent entwining a staff was the symbol of the physician. The serpent-wound staff of Hermes remains the emblem of the medical profession. Among nearly all of these ancient peoples, the serpent was accepted as the symbol of wisdom or salvation. The antipathy which Christendom feels towards the snake is based upon the little understood allegory of the Garden of Eden. We have two more pictures here. This is the fleur de lis, which is the flower of life, which is the symbol of Louisiana, and I don't even see it here. Do you see a fleur de lis? I do not see a fleur de lis in here. Huh. The bee was used as a symbol of royalty in the immortal Charlemagne, and it is probable that the fleur de lis, or lily of France, is merely a conventionalized bee and not a flower. There is an ancient Greek legend to the effect that the 9 muses occasionally assume the form of bees. I'm really not seeing that at all. I don't even see a bee. How is this the flower of life? It does not make any sense. At all. There's nothing in that even intimidates the flower of life. I do not get this. The scorpion talisman. From Paracelsus's Archidoxus Magica. The scorpion often appears upon the talismans and charms of the Middle Ages. This hieroglyphic arachnidia was supposed to have the power of curing disease. The scorpion shown above was composed of several metals and was made under certain planetary configurations. Paracelsus advised that it be worn by those suffering from any derangement of the reproductive system. The serpent is true to the principle of wisdom, for it tempts a man to the knowledge of himself. Therefore, the knowledge of self resulted from man's disobedience to the demiurgus, Jehovah. How the serpent came to be in the garden of the Lord after God had declared that all creatures which he had made during the 6 days of creation were good, has not been satisfactorily answered by the interpreters of Scripture. There is an awful lot in Scripture that does not have a satisfactory answer, and if you don't understand that, you definitely need to go check out the Bible study. The tree that grows in the midst of the garden is the spinal fire. The knowledge of the use of that spinal fire is the gift of the great serpent. Notwithstanding statements to the contrary, the serpent is the symbol and prototype of the universal Savior, who redeems the worlds by giving creation the knowledge of itself and the realization of good and evil. If this be not so, why did Moses raise a brazen serpent upon a cross in the wilderness, that all who looked upon it might be saved from the sting of the lesser snakes? Was not the brazen serpent a prophecy of the crucified man to come? No, it was not. If the serpent be only a thing of evil, why did Christ instruct his disciples to be wise as serpents? We have talked in some exhaustive detail about that snake on a stick that was worshipped from the time of Moses up until the renewal of the temple. It was given a place of honor next to the altar in the original Temple of Solomon, where people venerated and prayed to this staff with a snake on it. It was, in no uncertain terms, absolutely idolatry. And it was not only tolerated, but encouraged in the Temple of Solomon during the days of Solomon. And if you don't understand that, you need to go back to the Bible study where we went through and talked about several of the contradictions, the direct contradictions that are within the books themselves. Right? Not even between the books, but there are direct contradictions within the books, They disagree with themselves within the book itself. Like each chapter has its own contradictions. And we went through the almost in the entirety of the Old Testament, pointing those out and talking about them in exhaustive detail. And one of those was the staff that they had up until the renewal of the temple. The accepted theory that the serpent is evil cannot be substantiated. Oh, and we're going to talk about this too, right quick, before we get into the next part, because it talked about the fire. The serpent bringing the fire of knowledge. That's true, right? That is, in my estimation, probably one of the better allegories of the Garden of Eden. I wasn't at this level when I did Genesis back in the Bible study, and so I probably should revisit that, but I'm not going to. And so we'll address it here. This is only half of the story, though. Do you remember the story? There were 2 trees. You got one, which was knowledge, and you had the other one, which is eternal life. Well, guess what? There are 2 trees in you. There is the burning fire that everybody gets. Everybody talks about the one fire, but they don't talk about the second one, and that's why they get it wrong. There is a fire at the base, and that's what they're talking about. You unwind it through the various chakras all the way up to the top, and if you do so, it unlocks powers. It does. I will absolutely attest to that. I can talk about that one. But there is a second half of the equation, which you do have access to despite the best efforts of the book of Genesis. And it comes from the top and it goes down. It is a separate fire. It is the second tree in the Garden of Eden. And if you can unlock that one, you are really doing something. I have a whole playlist devoted to helping you to do that. And there are more coming to that. I have an intentional video that I am working out the actual mechanics of. That is coming with that information, that you have to use both halves. It does no good to only have one pillar. You got to have 2. You need Boaz and Jachin. There you go, my Mason fellows. I am not a Mason. I do not have any oaths. I am not restricted to secrecy. I can talk about these things all I want. It is something to look into. The accepted theory that the serpent is evil cannot be substantiated. It has long been viewed as the emblem of immortality. Let's do it again. Because there are control systems. Right? What it was just talking about, this snake being evil and this tree being the root of evil, is meant to keep you from reaching your full potential. The people who wrote that particular book were enacting a control system. They were designing it for their people in particular. But it was to restrict them from doing certain things that Moses did. He learned. He wasn't given the gift. He learned how to do it. He learned it from the Midians. It is possible that he picked up some of it from the Egyptians before he was cast out, if that story has any validity whatsoever. But it tells you right in the book that he was living in the land of Midian. Jethro was his father-in-law, and Jethro was the priest of the Midianites who did all of these miracles that he went to Egypt and claimed that God gave him. And so, this entire system is built to restrict you from using these 2 trees. It tells you flat out that if you use one, you'll be condemned to hell, and that's simply not true. You don't have to believe that. I know I am shitting on at least 2,000, but closer to 6,000 years worth of history, and I don't even care. I am here to point out things that are true, whether you like them or not. And one of those things is that Judaism, at a minimum, was a control system designed to help the Jews achieve a purpose, and it worked. But one of the side effects of that was the restriction from you doing the things that even Jesus told you that you could. And yet, in the same book, you are told that if you do them, it is witchcraft. If you use the power of God to heal yourself, that is witchcraft. If you go and pick a plant that holds antibiotic properties, you are a witch. I wonder why they're telling you that. It is the symbol of reincarnation or metempsychosis, because it annually sheds its skin, reappearing as it were in a new body. There is an ancient superstition to the effect that snakes never die except by violence, and that, if uninjured, they would live forever. It was also believed that snakes swallowed themselves, and this resulted in their being considered emblematic of the Supreme Creator, who periodically reabsorbed his universe back into himself. Yeah, square that one with Christianity. In Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky makes this significant statement concerning the origin of serpent worship. Before our globe had become egg-shaped or round, it was a long trail of cosmic dust or fire mist, moving and writhing like a serpent. This, say the explanations, was the Spirit of God moving on the chaos until its breath had incubated cosmic matter and made it assume the annular shape of a serpent, with its tail in its mouth, emblem of eternity in its spiritual and of our world in its physical sense. That is quite a leap, right? Nobody, as far as I know, was actually here at the formation of the world, and so to assume that because of the formation of the world is why we use the serpent is a wild, wild speculation. The seven-headed snake represents the supreme deity manifesting through his Elohim, or seven spirits, or seven virtues and vices, by whose aid he established his universe. The coils of the snake have been used by the pagans to symbolize the motion and also the orbits of the celestial bodies, and it is probable that the symbol of the serpent twisted around the egg, which was common to many of the ancient mystery schools, represented both the apparent motion of the sun around the earth and the bands of astral light, or the great magical agent, which move about the planet incessantly. Electricity was commonly symbolized by the serpent because of its motion. Electricity passing between the poles of a spark gap is serpentine in its motion. Force projected through atmosphere was called the Great Snake. Being symbolic of universal force, the serpent was emblematic of both good and evil. Force can tear down as rapidly as it can build up. The serpent with its tail in its mouth is the symbol of eternity, for in this position the body of the reptile has neither beginning nor end. The head and tail represent the positive and negative poles of the cosmic life circuit. The initiates of the mysteries were often referred to as serpents, and their wisdom was considered analogous to the divinely inspired power of the snake. There is no doubt that the title winged serpents, the seraphim, was given to one of the invisible hierarchies that labored within the earth during its early formation. There is a legend that in the beginning of the world, winged serpents reigned upon the earth. These were probably the demigods which antedate the historical civilization of every nation. The symbolic relationship between the sun and the serpent was found literal witness in the fact that life remains in the snake until sunset, even though it be cut into a dozen parts. The Hopi Indians consider the serpent to be in close communication with the earth spirit. Therefore, at the time of their annual snake dance, they send their prayers to the earth spirit by first specially sanctifying large numbers of these reptiles and then liberating them to return to the earth with the prayers of the tribe. I do not know if that's true. The great rapidity of motion manifested by lizards has caused them to be associated with Mercury, the messenger of the gods, whose winged feet traveled infinite distances almost instantaneously. A point which must not be overlooked in connection with reptiles and symbolism is clearly brought out by the eminent scholar, Dr. A.G. Santee, in his Anatomy of the Brain and Spinal Cord. In reptiles, there are two pineal bodies, an anterior and a posterior, of which the posterior remains undeveloped, but the anterior forms a rudimentary cyclopean eye. In the Hatteria, a New Zealand lizard, it projects through the parietal foramen and presents an imperfect lens and retina, and in its long stalk, nerve fibers. Crocodiles were regarded by the Egyptians both as symbols of Typhon and symbols of the supreme deity, of the latter because while underwater the crocodile is capable of seeing. Plutarch asserts, though its eyes are covered by a thin membrane. The Egyptians declared that no matter how far away the crocodile laid its eggs, The Nile would reach up to them in its next inundation, this reptile being endowed with a mysterious sense capable of making known the extent of the flood months before it took place. There were two kinds of crocodiles. The larger and more ferocious was hated by the Egyptians, for they likened it to the nature of Typhon, their destroying demon. Typhon waited to devour all who failed to pass the judgment of the dead, which rite took place in the Hall of Justice between the earth and the Elysian fields. Anthony Thompson thus describes the good treatment accorded these smaller and tamer crocodiles, which the Egyptians accepted as personifications of good. They were fed daily and occasionally had mulled wine poured down their throats. Their ears were ornamented with rings of gold and precious stones, and their forefeet adorned with bracelets. To the Chinese, the turtle was a symbol of longevity. At a temple in Singapore, a number of sacred turtles are kept, their age recorded by carvings on their shells. The American Indians use the ridge down the back of the turtle shell as a symbol of the great divide between life and death. The turtle is a symbol of wisdom because it retires into itself and is its own protection. It is also a phallic symbol, as its relation to long life would signify. The Hindus symbolize the universe as being supported on the back of four great elephants, who in turn are standing upon an immense turtle, which is crawling continually through chaos. The Egyptian Sphinx, the Greek centaur, and the Assyrian man-bull have much in common. All are composite creatures combining human and animal members. In the mysteries, all signify the composite nature of man and subtly refer to the hierarchies of celestial beings that have charge of the destiny of mankind. These hierarchies are the 12 holy animals, now known as constellations, star groups, which are merely symbols of impersonal spiritual impulses. Chiron, the centaur, teaching the sons of men, symbolizes the intelligences of the constellation of Sagittarius, who were the custodians of the secret doctrine, while, geocentrically, the sun was passing through the sign of Gemini. The 5-footed Assyrian man-bull, with the wings of an eagle and the head of a man, is a reminder that the invisible nature of man has the wings of a god, the head of a man, and the body of a beast. The same concept was expressed through the Sphinx, that armed guardian of the mysteries who, crouching at the gate of the temple, denied entrance to the profane. Thus, placed between man and his divine possibilities, the Sphinx also represented the secret doctrine itself. Children's fairy stories abound with descriptions of symbolic monsters, for nearly all such tales are based upon ancient mystic folklore. And we have two more to carry us out. What is this? The Uraeus, from Kircher's Apitius Aegypticus. The spinal cord was symbolized by a snake, and the serpent coiled upon the foreheads of the Egyptian initiates represented the divine fire which had crawled, serpent-like, up the tree of life. And we have the principles of Persia symbolized by the serpents contending for the mundane egg, from Montjamon, Evil and Good, from Maurice's Indian Antiquities. Both Mithras, the Persian Redeemer, and Serapis, the Egyptian god of the earth, are symbolized by serpents coiled around their bodies. This remarkable drawing shows the good and evil principles of Persia, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, contending for the egg of earth, which each trying to wrench from the teeth of the other. And thus ends this section. And we did not get to the theory of spiritual evolution today because I had thought that was going to be more talked about than it was, and so I'm going to throw it here on the end. I hold unconventional beliefs. If you don't know that, you should definitely check out some of these other playlists. Some of them are labeled unconventional for a reason. I believe that your soul is an individualized piece of God. I believe that everything that lives and breathes and moves has a individualized piece of God that is them, regardless of the size that we are contending with. I believe that the first level of existence is merely existing, right? That is the level 1, the first plane, the first sense. It is merely existing. It is symbolized by rocks, best. Right? There are various elements that are composed in the rocks, and each one of those little elements are doing their very best to be the best rock ever. What does that mean? It means that they get eroded and washed away, and then eventually that piece of calcium that used to be the rock is picked up by the next part of life, which is plants. Right? Plants can grow in two directions, right? They grow up and a little bit out, but they're not able to move at all freely. They're in the second dimension. It's like a 2D plane. You can only go in one direction. There's a little bit of movement depending on the wind, but they cannot just move themselves from here to there because they like the water over there better. The third plane of existence is animals. But not just any animals. It is fishes, insects, animals that do not really think. There's a difference between animals that think and the animals that don't, right? This animal right here, this animal can be trained to do a wide variety of things. They can think. They can reason to a certain small amount. That puts them on the fourth plane as opposed to the third, because the third plane you can grow and you can move, but you don't have any concept of thought. There is no planning. It is pure instinctual movement. That is symbolized by a snake or a lizard or whatever. You can't train a snake to do a damn thing. You can train a dog. You can, in small part, train a cat, a horse, even a cow and a pig. They can all be trained for something. They have some small concept of thought. It is not thought that we live with, but it is thought. They do not, however, have the concept of time, and we do here in the fifth dimension. I've been saying the fourth, I don't know why, but we live in the fifth dimension. What's the fifth dimension? It is length, width, and breadth, the 3, and then it is thought, 4, and it is time, 5. We have the concept of time. These animals back here, they don't have the concept of time. They have a rough estimation that it is today, kind of, and it's like, hey, feed me, right? But they don't have the concept of, hey, feed me in 2 days. They don't have that. They don't have the concept of, let's put up food for 2 days from now. Well, they don't have the concept of, in a year from now, the conditions might be different. They live, they think, they can move, they can be trained, but they have no concept of time. We do. We live in the fifth plane of existence. We have the concept of time. We can grow up, out, move over there, think about why we want to move over there, and think about what will happen later if we do move over there. The sixth plane of existence is, in my estimation, the spirit guides, right? They have all of these things that we do, even if we do not understand them, right? They can move, they can do, they can see forward and backwards in time in a way that we don't. They may not have the full understanding of that, but they are able to guide you in very real ways. The sixth or the seventh plane, I believe, which is the ending of the octave, if you're unfamiliar with how this pattern works, is, I believe, probably the guardian angels, right? The ones who come down to command, the ones who come down to destroy, the ones who come down to start things. And they have a better concept of time and its full implication. Now, this is a rough working theory that I cannot in any way prove, right? It is just me being logical and trying to deduce these things. The eighth, which is, in my estimation, the beginning of the next harmonic, is, of course, the beginning. It is the end, and the alpha and the omega. It is the creative force, and it is beyond all of our scope. It is infinite in the way that we cannot even really conceive of. To me, that is the theory of spiritual evolution, right? You start off with 1 and you get absorbed into 2. You become a plant, which then you get absorbed into 3 by an animal that eats the plant, which gets absorbed by 4, which is an animal that probably eats the other animal. And then it gets into 5, which is us, which eats the plants and the animals. All of that is assimilating into our material, that which is the physical. I believe that that is represented fairly well by this. The chakras coming up gets us into the throat, which is something that makes us different from other animals. We can communicate. The last 2 steps, right, 6 and 7, not 8, because that is the overarching all. But those are more of a spiritual nature, and they are on the level that we really cannot even comprehend. And yes, I know that there's probably some severe flaws in my particular view on these things, and I am okay with that. It is speculation, and it will be speculation until we get to the other side. There is no way to prove any of this incontrovertibly. We don't have a missing link for macroevolution. We do, however, have several evidences for microevolution. We do have us being able to go from stone tools held in your hand to firearms that shoot way over there. We throw a rock really, really fast these days. We went through the process of learning how to shoot a bow and throw a spear. And now we have firearms. That is microevolution. But if you were to go back 4,000 years ago, you could find a person that looked remarkably like me. They could think, they could reason, they could do all of the things, but they had not yet evolved to the point where they could control electricity. They had not evolved to the point where they could control explosions or sometimes even fire. But they looked exactly like me. They may have been a little stockier, they may have been a little taller, they may have been a little bit different, but they were humans. No matter how far you go back, you cannot find the point where we were animals. We have an incomplete fossil record. Okay, I grant you that. But we don't even have the intimation that it was a possibility. We have the assumption that we found this type of creature. And so, because we need an explanation of where we came from, we say that that's where we came from. But we really don't even share all of the DNA in the same way. And so, there's severe problems with macroevolution. It can be true. I always hold out the possibility that I am incorrect in pretty much everything that I do. And I talk about these things, and if I am speculating, I say I am speculating. The things that I know, I know. But the things that I'm speculating on, I completely am okay with being wrong about. This seems like a good fit. So that's what I go with. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment, not too much confusion, and possibly a little bit of levity to a somewhat complicated series of topics. Not even really, like, this wasn't all that complicated. There's a bunch of legends, but there wasn't a whole lot of even real knowledge in this. There's a lot of history, and that's good to know, but it's not like the fruit that we're looking for. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if you really like what I'm doing here, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.